The sound of splintering wood echoed through my quiet neighborhood as the HOA enforcement officer kicked in my front door. Behind him stood two police officers, their hands resting on their weapons as they screamed about violations and legal consequences. My neighbors watched from their windows, phones recording every humiliating second as these uniformed bullies ransacked my home looking for infractions that did not exist. Standing in my destroyed doorway, watching them tear through my personal belongings, I felt something I had buried for 15 years begin to stir. The peaceful suburban homeowner they saw before them was about to disappear forever. They had no idea that the quiet man they were humiliating had once commanded respect from some of the most dangerous people in the state. As they handed me another fabricated violation notice, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to make some phone calls. 5 years ago, I bought my dream home in Maple Grove Estates. After decades of living on the edge, riding with motorcycle clubs and making enemies faster than friends, I was ready for something different. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet mornings with coffee on my front porch and evenings tending to my garden without looking over my shoulder. The neighborhood welcomed me with open arms at first. My house was a modest two-story colonial with a white picket fence and a lawn that I kept pristine. I traded my leather jacket for polo shirts and my Harley for a Honda Civic. The transformation was complete, or so I thought. The Maple Grove Homeowners Association had been around for 20 years, but it was run by reasonable people who understood that homeownership came with certain freedoms. The monthly fees were fair, the community events were optional, and the rules were simple common sense. Keep your grass cut, do not park boats in your driveway, and respect your neighbors. Then Margaret Chen became the HOA president. Margaret was a retired corporate lawyer who had moved to our neighborhood 2 years after me. She was the type of person who measured grass with a ruler and took photographs of garbage cans left out 5 minutes past pickup time. Within 6 months of taking office, she had transformed our peaceful community into a surveillance state. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter about my mailbox. According to the new regulations, all mailboxes had to be painted in one of 3 approved colors. Mine was black. I needed to repaint it forest green, colonial blue, or antique white within 30 days or face a $50 fine. I painted it forest green. It seemed reasonable enough. The second letter arrived 3 weeks later. My garden gnome was apparently in violation of the new lawn ornament policy. Only seasonal decorations were allowed, and they could not remain up for more than 60 days. My gnome had been there for 4 years, but now it was a problem. I stored the gnome in my garage, still trying to keep the peace. The third letter made my blood pressure spike. The small American flag I had mounted next to my front door was supposedly too large according to the new flag display guidelines. The irony was not lost on me that a homeowners association was telling a military veteran how to display his country's flag. I replaced it with a smaller one, but something was shifting inside me. Margaret Chen was not interested in community improvement. She was interested in control. Every new rule seemed designed to target specific homeowners, and I was quickly becoming her favorite target. The other board members were either too intimidated to speak up or too invested in their own petty power trips to care about fairness. My neighbors began avoiding eye contact when they saw me outside. Fear had crept into our community like a cancer, spreading from house to house as people realized that any one of them could be next on Margaret's list. I started keeping records. Every letter, every fine, every interaction with the HOA was documented and filed away. My military training had taught me the value of preparation, and my years on the road had taught me that bullies only understood one language. But I was not that person anymore. I was a suburban homeowner who paid his taxes, kept his property clean, and bothered no one. I was determined to handle this situation the right way, through proper channels and reasonable discussion. Looking back, I realize how naive that was. Margaret Chen had no interest in reasonable discussion. She had found her target, and she was going to make an example of me whether I followed the rules or not. The old me would have handled this very differently. But the old me was buried under 5 years of suburban tranquility, and I was not ready to dig him up just yet. The harassment began in earnest 3 months after Margaret took office. What started as petty complaints about mailbox colors escalated into a full-scale campaign of intimidation that would have impressed a military strategist. I received my first certified letter on a Tuesday morning. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and required my signature. Inside was a violation notice claiming that my trash cans were visible from the street, violating the new waste management policy. The fine was $100, with an additional $50 for each day the violation continued. I had put my trash cans out for pickup exactly as I had for 5 years. The same spot, the same time, the same routine, but now it was a violation. I moved the cans to the side of my house where they could not be seen from the street. 2 days later, I received another certified letter. Now the cans were too close to my neighbor's property line, violating the setback requirements. Another $100 fine. The pattern became clear. Every solution I implemented created a new problem. Every rule I followed spawned 2 more rules designed to trap me in an endless cycle of violations and fines. Margaret Chen began conducting surprise inspections of my property. She would arrive unannounced with a clipboard and camera, walking around my yard, and taking photographs of everything from the height of my grass to the placement of my garden hose. She measured distances with a tape measure and documented her findings in a thick binder that seemed to grow larger each week. The psychological warfare was deliberate and effective. I never knew when she would appear or what new violation she would discover. The uncertainty was exhausting. I found myself constantly checking my yard for potential infractions, second-guessing every decision about my own property. The letters came almost daily now. My garden hose was coiled incorrectly. My outdoor light fixture was the wrong style. My car was parked 3 inches too far from the curb. Each violation came with escalating fines and increasingly aggressive language about legal consequences. I requested a meeting with the HOA board to discuss the situation. Margaret agreed to see me, but only during business hours on a Thursday when most people would be at work. I took time off and arrived at the community center conference room exactly on time. Margaret sat at the head of the table with 2 other board members flanking her like bodyguards. She was a small woman in her 60s, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who had spent decades crushing opponents in corporate boardrooms. "Mr. Rodriguez," she began, not looking up from her paperwork, "I understand you have concerns about your recent violations." I had prepared for this meeting. I brought photographs, documentation, and a detailed timeline of every interaction we had. I was ready to present my case calmly and professionally. "Mrs. Chen," I said, spreading my documents on the table, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Many of these violations are for things that have never been problems before, and some appear to be completely fabricated." She looked up at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Mr. Rodriguez, ignorance of the rules is not an excuse. We have standards in this community, and you will follow them or face the consequences." I showed her the photographs proving that my trash cans were positioned exactly where they had been for years. She dismissed them without a glance. I presented evidence that other homeowners had identical setups without violations. She claimed those were different circumstances. For every piece of evidence I presented, she had a dismissive response. For every reasonable question I asked, she had an unreasonable answer. The meeting lasted 15 minutes, and I left knowing that logic and documentation would not solve this problem. The violations continued, the fines accumulated, the harassment intensified. My neighbors began crossing the street to avoid me. The fear was contagious, and association with me had become a liability. People who had been friendly for years now pretended not to see me when I waved. I was being systematically isolated and financially drained. Margaret Chen was not just enforcing rules. She was conducting a campaign of deliberate persecution designed to force me out of the neighborhood. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the growing pile of violation notices. The total fines had reached $3,000 for infractions that ranged from petty to completely fictional. My peaceful suburban life was crumbling, and I was running out of legal options. For the first time in 5 years, I began to think about the phone numbers I had buried in my desk drawer. Numbers that belonged to people who understood a different kind of justice. The final straw came on a quiet Thursday morning in September. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard vehicles pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I saw Margaret Chen climbing out of her silver SUV, followed by two uniformed police officers and a man in a city inspector's jacket. My doorbell rang with the aggressive urgency of someone who was not planning to wait for an answer. I opened the door to find Margaret standing on my porch with a clipboard in one hand and a smug expression on her face. "Mr. Rodriguez," she announced loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "we are here to conduct an emergency inspection of your property. We have received reports of serious violations that require immediate attention." Behind her, the police officers looked uncomfortable. One of them, a young man who could not have been more than 25, kept glancing around as if he was not sure why he was there. The city inspector seemed more interested in his phone than the supposed emergency. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the rage building in my chest. Margaret consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. "Reports of unsafe electrical work, unpermitted modifications to your property, and potential code violations that could endanger the entire neighborhood." I knew she was lying. I had not done any electrical work or modifications to my property, but I also knew that refusing to cooperate with police officers would only make things worse. "You can inspect whatever you need to inspect," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. What happened next was not an inspection. It was a ransacking. Margaret Chen moved through my house like a woman possessed, opening cabinets, examining outlets, and taking photographs of everything. She pointed to my ceiling fan installation and declared it unsafe. She claimed my kitchen outlets were not up to code. She even suggested that my cable television setup was an unpermitted modification. The police officers followed her around awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to challenge her authority. The city inspector made a few half-hearted notes but seemed to disagree with most of her findings. The breaking point came when Margaret entered my bedroom. "This is a private space," I said, blocking her path. "You have no right to be in here." Her eyes lit up with the thrill of confrontation. "Mr. Rodriguez, you are interfering with an official inspection. Officers, please escort him out of the way." The younger police officer looked at his partner uncertainly. "Ma'am, I do not think we can force him out of his own bedroom unless—" "Unless what?" Margaret snapped. "Unless you want to explain to your supervisor why you refuse to enforce a lawful inspection. I have the authority to examine every inch of this property, and I will not be intimidated by someone with his background." Her last comment hit me like a physical blow. Someone with his background. She had been investigating me. She knew about my past and she was using it as a weapon. The older police officer stepped forward. "Sir, please step aside and let the lady do her job." I moved out of the way, but something fundamental had changed. The mask of suburban respectability that I had worn for 5 years was cracking, and the person underneath was someone Margaret Chen did not want to meet. She spent 20 minutes in my bedroom, photographing my closet, my dresser, and even my nightstand. She claimed my ceiling fan was improperly installed and that my electrical outlets were positioned incorrectly. Every single finding was fabricated nonsense, but she documented it all with the enthusiasm of someone who had found buried treasure. When they finally left, I was holding a violation notice that totaled over $5,000 in fines. The list of infractions included unsafe electrical work, unpermitted modifications, improper installation of fixtures, and failure to maintain property to community standards. I stood in my doorway, watching Margaret Chen drive away while my neighbors peered out their windows at the spectacle. The humiliation was complete. I had been publicly branded as a problem homeowner, a code violator, and a threat to community safety. But humiliation was not the emotion consuming me as I closed my damaged door. It was cold, calculating fury. Margaret Chen had made a critical error. She had pushed a man who had spent decades learning how to push back. She had targeted someone who understood that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to become something they fear more than you fear them. That afternoon, I walked to my garage and opened a toolbox I had not touched in 5 years. Inside, wrapped in an old leather jacket, was a cell phone with numbers I had promised myself I would never call again. I charged the phone and scrolled through the contacts. Names that belonged to people who had ridden with me, fought beside me, and owed me favors that never expired. People who understood that respect was not given freely, but earned through action and maintained through strength. Margaret Chen had no idea what she had awakened, but she was about to learn that some people have resources that do not appear on any background check. The first call I made was to Tommy Diesel Morrison, a man who had been my lieutenant when I ran with the Steel Wolves Motorcycle Club 15 years ago. Tommy owned a legitimate auto repair shop now, but he had never forgotten the brotherhood that had kept us alive through some very dark times. "Well, I will be damned," Tommy said when he heard my voice. "Jake Rodriguez, I thought you had gone completely suburban on us." "I tried," I replied, "but apparently suburban life is not as peaceful as advertised." I explained the situation to Tommy, laying out the timeline of harassment, the fabricated violations, and the public humiliation I had endured. He listened without interruption, occasionally making sounds of disgust at the more outrageous details. "So let me get this straight," Tommy said when I finished. "Some corporate lawyer is trying to push you out of your own neighborhood using fake violations and crooked inspections." "That is exactly what is happening. And you want to handle this the right way, through lawyers and proper channels." I paused, considering my words carefully. I want to handle this effectively. I want these people to understand that actions have consequences. Tommy chuckled, a sound that reminded me of better times when problems were solved through direct action rather than bureaucratic nonsense. Jake, you always were the smart one. Give me 48 hours to make some calls. We are going to need legal advice, documentation, and a strategy that keeps everyone out of prison. The second call was to Maria Santos, a former club member who had put herself through law school after leaving the life behind. Maria now ran a successful practice specializing in civil rights and property law. She had helped several former club members navigate legal troubles over the years. "Jake Rodriguez," she said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "I heard you had become a respectable suburban homeowner. How is that working out for you?" "Not as well as I hoped," I admitted, then explained the situation again. Maria listened with professional interest, asking detailed questions about documentation, timelines, and potential witnesses. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Jake, what you are describing is harassment, possibly criminal harassment. This woman is using her position to conduct a personal vendetta against you. The fabricated violations, the surprise inspections, the deliberate isolation. This is a pattern of behavior that could constitute stalking under state law. What can we do about it? Legally, we can file complaints with the state attorney general, request an audit of the HOA's finances, and potentially pursue civil rights violations. But that will take months, maybe years." "And unofficially?" Maria laughed. "Unofficially, I think Margaret Chen is about to discover that some people have friends who do not appreciate bullies." The third call was to Vincent Bear Kowalski, a mountain of a man who had been our club's enforcer back in the day. Bear had gone legitimate as well, starting a successful security consulting firm that specialized in corporate investigations and asset protection. "Jake Rodriguez," Bear said in his distinctive gravelly voice, "I heard you retired from the interesting life. What changed your mind?" I told him about Margaret Chen and the HOA harassment campaign. Bear listened with the patient attention of someone who had spent decades sizing up opponents and identifying their weaknesses. "You want me to look into this woman's background?" Bear asked. "I want you to look into all of them. The entire HOA board, their families, their businesses, their finances. I want to know what they are hiding and where they are vulnerable. That is going to take some time and resources." "I have time, and I have resources." Bear was quiet for a moment. "Jake, you know I have to ask, are we talking about intimidation here? Because if we are, I need to know the boundaries." "We are talking about justice, Bear. These people are bullies who have been operating without consequences for too long. I want them to understand that their actions affect real people with real resources." "I understand. Give me a week. I will have everything you need to know about Margaret Chen and her friends." Over the next 2 days, I made 6 more calls. Each conversation was a carefully orchestrated recruitment of people who owed me favors, respected my leadership, or simply understood that brotherhood extended beyond the boundaries of time and lifestyle changes. By the end of the week, I had assembled a team that included legal expertise, investigative resources, and strategic thinking. More importantly, I had reminded myself that respect was not something you asked for. It was something you commanded. Margaret Chen had made the mistake of assuming that a quiet suburban homeowner was powerless against institutional authority. She was about to learn that some people carry their power with them wherever they go, and that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who choose not to fight until they have no other choice. Bear Kowalski delivered his report exactly 1 week after our phone call. He met me at a coffee shop 15 miles from my neighborhood, carrying a thick manila envelope that would change everything. "Margaret Chen is not just a bully," Bear said, sliding the envelope across the table. "She is a criminal." I opened the envelope to find financial records, bank statements, and photographs that painted a picture of systematic fraud. Margaret had been embezzling from the HOA for over a year, using her position to award contracts to companies she secretly owned and billing the association for services that were never performed. She has stolen at least $40,000 from the homeowners association, Bear continued. Probably more. She covers it up by increasing fines and assessments, making it look like the community is just more expensive to maintain than it used to be. The documentation was thorough and damning. Margaret had created shell companies to receive payments for landscaping, maintenance, and security services. She had inflated budgets and approved expenditures that existed only on paper. The HOA's financial records showed payments to vendors that did not exist and services that were never provided. "But that is not the best part," Bear said with a grin. "She has been doing this at 2 other communities where she previously served on HOA boards. Same pattern, same methods, same results. She is a professional HOA scammer." I studied the photographs of Margaret's lifestyle. Expensive cars, luxury vacations, and a home that was far beyond what a retired corporate lawyer should be able to afford. The evidence was overwhelming. "What about the other board members?" I asked. "Mostly just useful idiots," Bear replied. "They are either too stupid to realize what she is doing or too scared to challenge her, but there are 2 exceptions." He showed me photographs of board members Patricia Williams and David Chang. Both had been receiving kickbacks from Margaret's schemes, approving fraudulent contracts in exchange for personal payments. Patricia owns a small accounting firm that has been getting paid to do books for companies that do not exist, Bear explained. David's construction company has been billing the HOA for materials that were never delivered. They are all in on it. The reconnaissance extended beyond financial crimes. Bear had documented a pattern of harassment against other homeowners who had challenged Margaret's authority. 3 families had been driven out of the neighborhood through campaigns similar to what I was experiencing. 2 others had paid thousands in fabricated fines rather than fight the system. "She targets people she thinks are vulnerable," Bear said. "Single mothers, elderly residents, anyone who might not have the resources to fight back. You were supposed to be another easy target." Tommy arrived at the coffee shop as Bear was finishing his briefing. Behind him walked 2 other men I recognized from the old days. Marcus Wrench, Thompson, and Joey Locksmith Benedetto had both gone legitimate, but they still understood the value of brotherhood and mutual support. "So what is the plan?" Tommy asked, settling into a chair. I spread the financial documents across the table. "We are going to give Margaret Chen exactly what she gave me: public humiliation, legal consequences, and the realization that her actions have serious repercussions." "You want to expose the financial crimes?" Marcus asked. "I want to do more than that. I want to make sure she and her accomplices understand that their days of bullying innocent people are over." We spent the next hour developing a strategy that would combine legal action with psychological pressure. The financial evidence would be turned over to the state attorney general and the district attorney. The harassment patterns would be documented and presented to civil rights organizations. The HOA members would be confronted with proof of their betrayal. But first, we were going to pay a visit to the HOA board meeting. "When is their next meeting?" Joey asked. I checked my calendar. "Thursday night, 7 o'clock at the community center." Tommy grinned. "Perfect. That gives us 3 days to prepare." As we left the coffee shop, I felt something I had not experienced in years. The satisfaction of having a plan, the confidence that comes from superior resources, and the anticipation of justice finally being served. Margaret Chen had spent months trying to make me feel powerless and isolated. On Thursday night, she was going to discover that some people are never truly powerless, and that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who choose their battles carefully. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel more dramatic. I dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing clothes that struck the right balance between respectability and intimidation. Dark jeans, black leather jacket, and steel-toed boots. The suburban homeowner was gone, replaced by someone Margaret Chen had never met. The community center parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived at 6:45. Margaret's silver SUV was there, along with the vehicles belonging to the other board members. Through the windows, I could see them setting up for what they assumed would be another routine meeting. At exactly 7 o'clock, the rumble of motorcycle engines filled the quiet evening air. Tommy led the convoy on his restored Harley-Davidson, followed by Bear, Marcus, Joey, and 3 other men who had answered the call. 7 motorcycles in total, their engines creating a symphony of power that echoed off the buildings and sent a clear message about the nature of our visit. We parked in formation directly in front of the community center, our bikes creating an impressive display of chrome and leather that would be visible from inside the building. The message was subtle but unmistakable. The dynamics of power in this community had just shifted dramatically. I walked through the front door first, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The others followed at a respectful distance, their presence felt but not overwhelming. We were not there to intimidate through numbers, but to demonstrate that actions have consequences. The conference room door was closed, but I could hear voices inside discussing routine business. I opened it without knocking and stepped inside. Margaret Chen looked up from her agenda, her face transitioning from annoyance to confusion to genuine fear as she saw me, then the men filing in behind me. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly aware that this was not going to be a normal meeting. "Mr. Rodriguez," Margaret said, her voice higher than usual, "this is a private board meeting. You cannot just—" "Actually, Mrs. Chen," I interrupted, settling into a chair at the far end of the table, "under the HOA bylaws, homeowners have the right to address the board during regular meetings. I am here to address some concerns." Tommy and Bear took positions by the door, their presence making it clear that leaving would require their permission. Marcus and Joey flanked the table, while the others arranged themselves around the room in a formation that was both casual and strategic. Margaret's eyes darted between the faces surrounding her, finally settling on me with a mixture of defiance and growing panic. "What do you want?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out the manila envelope Bear had given me. The sound of paper sliding across the table was unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet room. "I want to discuss your theft of $43,000 from the Homeowners Association," I said calmly. "I want to talk about the shell companies you created to funnel money into your personal accounts. I want to address the systematic harassment you have been conducting against homeowners who question your authority." The color drained from Margaret's face. Patricia Williams made a choking sound. David Chang actually stood up as if to run, but Bear's presence by the door made him think better of it. "I do not know what you're talking about," Margaret stammered. I opened the envelope and began spreading documents across the table. Bank statements, contracts, photographs, and financial records that told the complete story of her crimes. "Sunset Landscaping Services," I said, pointing to a contract. A company that exists only on paper but has been paid $18,000 for services never performed. The address listed is a post office box registered to your daughter. Margaret's hands were shaking now. This is harassment. I am calling the police. Please do, I replied. I am sure they will be very interested in these documents. In fact, I have already scheduled a meeting with the district attorney for tomorrow morning. I continued laying out the evidence, each document another nail in the coffin of Margaret's carefully constructed fraud. The shell companies, the kickbacks, the pattern of harassment that had driven 3 families out of the neighborhood. You made a mistake, Margaret, I said, my voice never rising above conversational level. You assumed that quiet people are powerless people. You thought you could abuse your position without consequences. Patricia Williams began crying. David Chang buried his face in his hands. Margaret Chen sat frozen, staring at the overwhelming evidence of her crimes. Here is what is going to happen, I continued. You are going to resign from the board immediately. You are going to make full restitution to the homeowners association. You are going to drop all fabricated violations against me and any other homeowner you have been harassing. I stood up, and the others moved with me in perfect synchronization. And if you ever target another innocent homeowner for your personal profit, my friends and I will be back. Next time, we will not be nearly as polite. We filed out of the room in the same formation we had entered, leaving the HOA board to contemplate their suddenly uncertain future. The message had been delivered, the evidence presented, and the consequences made clear. Justice had been served. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Margaret Chen submitted her resignation letter to the Homeowners Association the next morning, citing personal reasons for her departure. Patricia Williams and David Chang followed suit within 48 hours, their departures accompanied by whispered conversations about financial irregularities and potential legal consequences. The district attorney's office moved quickly once I presented Bear's evidence. A formal investigation was opened into the HOA's financial practices, with forensic accountants examining every transaction from the past 2 years. The local newspaper picked up the story, running headlines about HOA fraud scheme exposed, and homeowner fights back against corrupt board. Within a week, Margaret Chen was facing criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The shell companies were shut down, the stolen money was recovered, and the pattern of harassment was exposed for the entire community to see. But the real victory was not in the courtroom or the newspaper headlines. It was in the transformation of my neighborhood from a place of fear back into a genuine community. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived next door, knocked on my door 3 days after the confrontation. She had been one of Margaret's victims, fined hundreds of dollars for violations that never existed and too frightened to fight back. I wanted to thank you, she said, her eyes bright with gratitude. I have been afraid to check my mail for months, worried about what new violation notice might be waiting. You gave me my peace of mind back. Similar conversations happened throughout the week. The single mother who had been harassed about her children's toys, the retired teacher who had been fined for having the wrong color mailbox, the veteran who had been threatened with legal action for displaying his flag. One by one, they came forward to share their stories and express their gratitude. The new HOA board was elected within a month, consisting of homeowners who understood that their role was to serve the community, not rule it. The first order of business was implementing new policies that protected homeowner rights and established clear procedures for addressing disputes. All fabricated violations were dismissed. All questionable fines were refunded. The harassment campaigns were officially condemned, and new bylaws were put in place to prevent future abuse of power. Tommy, Bear, and the others became regular visitors to my neighborhood, not as intimidating figures, but as friends who understood the value of loyalty and community. They helped Mrs. Patterson with her yard work, taught neighborhood kids about motorcycle safety, and became part of the fabric of our suburban life. The transformation was remarkable. Fear had been replaced by mutual respect. Suspicion had given way to genuine neighborly concern. The community that Margaret Chen had nearly destroyed through her greed and power hunger was stronger than ever. I learned something important about myself during those months of harassment and eventual victory. Peace is not something you achieve by avoiding conflict. Peace is something you earn by standing up to those who would destroy it. The quiet suburban homeowner I had tried to become was not weak or naive. He was someone who chose his battles carefully and fought them with the full force of his resources and relationships. The leadership skills I had developed in my previous life had not disappeared. They had evolved into something more sophisticated and effective. Margaret Chen had assumed that leaving my past behind meant abandoning my strength. She discovered that growth and change do not require weakness, and that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones who choose diplomacy first but never forget how to fight. 6 months later, I was sitting on my front porch on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and watching my neighbors tend to their gardens. The American flag flew proudly next to my door. My garden gnome had returned to his place of honor, and my mailbox was painted whatever color I chose. The peace I had was not the peace of submission or compromise. It was the peace of victory, earned through courage, preparation, and the support of people who understood that some things are worth fighting for. Sometimes the only way to preserve the life you want is to fight for it with everything you have. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to remind them that respect is not given freely, but earned through action and maintained through strength. And sometimes, the quiet suburban homeowner is exactly the person you should be most afraid of crossing.